Hi, everybody. Good. I would say good morning, good afternoon. I guess still good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sarah Lefton. I'm the Senior Vice President of Philanthropy, and I run the annual campaign at UJA. First of all, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. This is our new format, the way of the world. I guess we're all getting used to Zoom and our webinars. But on the bright side, I've just been saying, Rabbi Dolgan and I were just speaking, it's really allowing us to engage so many different community members and to bring interesting content to you. So we're just, we're happy to be able to provide this. We're very excited that you've joined us today. And there's certainly, it's certainly a very relevant topic as we go into what's going to be a very different Passover than normal. So I think I don't want to go on too long because we're here for Rabbi Dolgan, of course, and to hear about Passover. Just to give a quick update, because I think most of you are very involved in community and want to know a little bit about what's going on. I know many of you have been involved in helping us to reach out, helping UJA to reach out to the tens of thousands of community members who right now are at home. I mean, almost everybody is at home, is isolated except for our frontline workers. And I just want to thank you. We've had more than 750 volunteers step up and help us do wellness calls and check-ins to community members and identify people who are in need. If you know somebody who's in need, if you know someone who needs help in this time, if you know someone who just can't leave their house and needs access to groceries, prescriptions, or anything, please raise it with UJA. You can call us anytime and let us know. We're happy to arrange for help for someone in the community who's in need. If you're willing to volunteer and to help us make some phone calls and check in and make sure everyone's okay, please also don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we have about 750 volunteers now, and we're looking for more because we have a remarkable community. And when we see everybody step up and take care of each other in this time of crisis, it's really something that other communities are watching and just can't believe what we've been able to do here in the Jewish community in Toronto. So with that said, I hope you're all okay and that you're all healthy at home. And I'm very excited today to introduce Rabbi Michael Dolgan, who is the senior rabbi at Temple Sinai. Also, I'm lucky because he's my rabbi and has been since I was very little. Rabbi Dolgan's here with us today to talk about Passover, talk about the main themes of Passover, but he'll talk a little bit. And then, it'll be an open conversation, and I'll turn it over to him because we're very lucky to hear from him so close to what's going to be a very busy time for Rabbi Dolgan and for the community. So thank you, Rabbi Dolgan, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks to UJA for the invitation, for the opportunity to do this together. It's a reminder, just as you were saying, about I think it's so wonderful about that all the central and all of the organizations in the city have been reaching out and connecting to people to hear what UJA has done, to know that Temple Sinai and the other synagogues likewise are stepping up and reaching out to people. This is a time where there's a lot to learn about how much we can do for each other. And especially in a difficult time, but hopefully this will continue far beyond these particular days. Like Sarah said, it's wonderful that we can connect in these new ways. Recently did a study session from the synagogue where I'm not. This is our chapel at Temple Sinai, but I'm safely at home, like I hope everybody else is. It's just nice to be able to project that comforting image. But we did this study session recently that was mostly people from Temple Sinai and people from Beersheba, but also had attendees from Istanbul and Warsaw and all over. So it's fantastic how this technology that we've been forced into using, many of us, I can speak that for myself, I am not a technologically able person. We've been forced to do it, but it gives us some wonderful new opportunity. So we do want to make the most of that here this morning as it comes the afternoon here in Toronto. So I'm gonna start off talking about the holiday and focusing on how this year is different and how we can make it different. But at the same time, even as I do, I just want to make sure to make clear that this year, it being during such a different time, that if there are questions on your mind, then please chat them to us. Sarah is going to monitor the chat for us so that we can, frankly, as much as I would love to do a webinar like this every day, just like I've been sharing tidbits on our daily stream from our synagogue every day about Pesach, I would love to do it. There's lots to tell, but I really want to talk about what it is that you're interested in talking about. And I think in many ways, you know, that's really what this holiday is all about. So let me just fix my sharing just for a second because of the joys of technology. I'm going to do it just slightly differently. I'm sure that will enable us to see what it is we want to see. And of course, the night of the Seder, which I'm going to focus on because even though Pesach is the entire holiday, so much of the meaning of it is focused on that first night and that first day, and then the second night as well. And of course, no words are more emblematic than the Manishtana, than the 4 questions that say on how different is this night from all other nights. As I'm sharing with you there, this night is different for all Jews. It's amazing how all around the world, whether Jews are, whether their Judaism and their religious observance is central to their life, or whether their Jewish identity is important but expressed in so many different ways, this night and this moment matters so much to people. But the nature of the moment is what I want to focus on. I think on a year like this, where so much that is basic to our experience of that first night is going to change, we put too much pressure on ourselves to say, okay, how can I keep every little piece of it? How can I maintain this and how can I maintain that? And certainly whatever we can do that's going to bring strength and comfort to us and our family members without endangering anyone's safety is really important. However, what I'm going to focus on through most of this webinar is what are the core messages and ideas that even if we don't do a lot of the things that we usually do in the carrying out of our Pesach Seder, what are the core things that hopefully we can find a way to connect to this year? You know, on all other nights, we observe traditions for many reasons. It's to experience our identity, to respond to the divine command. Certainly, if you want to share what are the reasons that Pesach Seder is special to you, please go ahead and put them in the chat for people to see. But on this night, one of the things that makes Pesach special is that so many of the things that we do in our Seder, it says in our tradition, are done just to create questions. That's all. That we do things we don't do at any other time so that the children, so that each of us, because it's our goal to learn each and every day, each of us might think of and ask new questions. And that's really, Seder is supposed to be interactive. And so I encourage you, whatever form your Seder is going to take, to look for ways to share with one another, to make it interactive, and to have it be something that you share in together. Now, of course, when talking about the Seder, I want to take a little time and talk about the basic steps in a Pesach Seder and say just a quick word about each one. Because a Seder is a complex evening, right? Seder means order, just like Siddur, and carrying out this night in a particular order is so much a part of the experience. The first 2 steps in our Pesach Seder are Kadesh or Chatz, as we say. Kadesh is to declare this holy, is to make Kiddush, but it is that to raise that first cup of wine. And wine, symbolic of everything else, is a symbol of joy. And so I hope as we begin our Seders this year, we can start with something sweet and positive. Maybe we're lucky enough to have wine that's even better than some of the sweet kosher wine, but I hope that we can find a way to do that. And then what can speak more about this year than the second part of our Seder, Kadesh or Chatz, to wash our hands. That's right, this night we wash our hands not once, but twice. And this first time at the beginning of the Seder, we wash our hands without a blessing. It's not like when we do it before we have bread, as many Jews who observe in that way do, but it is something that's supposed to be, even especially according to the mystical commentators, where we're taking a moment Yes, we should wash our hands vigorously before the Seder, but let's not just wash off the germs. In addition, let's wash off some of that stress, some of that pressure that we feel every day, because it is our challenge to make this a night of celebration. And of course, then we get right into the actual rituals of the Seder, Purpose, the eating of the greens. Eating the garnish is something that I grew up with at this part in the Seder, something that challenges us to do that. But let's look for the meaning, right? This is also not just Chag HaPesach, the holiday of Passover. It is also Chag HaAviv. It is the holiday of spring. And so let's also look for ways to help people experience that sense that this is a world that's awakening. And we look forward to a time when we can go out and take advantage of it. After that, the next step is Yachatz, is the breaking of the matzah in two. Matzah, of course, is lechem oni, is the bread of affliction. It's lechem ha'ani, it's the bread of the poor person. And I was so glad that Sarah started out our webinar today by talking about people in need, because it is essential at Passover time to be aware of those who need our support. Taking time, if you're comfortable using that kind of technology during your Seder or during the meal, and stopping and calling someone who isn't able to be with you, someone who might be alone. Even if they don't get the message then, but to remember in the midst of our celebration the plight of those who don't have, whether it's friendship and companionship or material resources. Let's make sure we include them in our Seder. Magid is the telling of the story. Eventually, whatever you do, even if you're one of those many families that have talked to me that said, I just can't face doing the whole book, sitting there with a computer and reading the whole book this year, or whatever the experience is. But let's tell the story of freedom and responsibility. Let's tell the story of the gift of being free and being able to support and help others. Let's also tell our personal stories. When I was privileged to spend Pesach in Israel, so many of the stories were not just the stories of the Exodus. They were, in fact, the stories of their aliyah, of their family's journey. So this year, don't hesitate to share personal journey stories, to talk about your history. So often we assume the next generation who might be with you or might be on Zoom knows those stories, and often that's not the case. So let's make sure that we have a chance to do that this year. Now is Rochza, is the actual washing of the hands with the blessing. This traditionally is, again, to raise questions that we've done it twice, but we wash our hands and prepare for taking in the symbols of the Seder. To making hamotzi, which we say hamotzi lechem, because this is a kind of lechem, a kind of bread, and making our blessing over the bread and the mitzvah of eating the matzah. Eating has changed for me during this time. I bet it has for you as well, right? The kind of shopping that we normally do, or that we normally do before Pesach, is so affected by our need to take care of one another and take care of ourselves and be safe. And I think that's going to bring special meaning to matzah this year, and the bitter herbs as well as maror. And interestingly enough, the word maror, which means bitterness, a bitter herb, is not the only one you'll find on your Seder plate. You'll find maror and you'll find chazeret. Maror is usually understood, especially in our part of the world, as horseradish. Chazeret is romaine lettuce, historically. There are many different herbs that are bitter, and we're supposed to use two different ones because the ancient Passover sacrifice was offered on two different kinds of bitter herbs with it. And so we continue that tradition. And then, of course, to Hillel, the inventor of the sandwich, right? Korech is to take the matzah of poverty and the charoset, the slavery, but also that sweetness that we no longer are enslaved, and to mix it with maror, matzah, and charoset together and take them in as the beginning to our meal. Of course, the adventure continues with Shulchan Orech, with a set table, one that'll likely be very different for us this year, but eating our dinner, and then seeking and finding the afikoman, the afikomen. Someone suggested to me, I thought it was a great idea, to come up with some kind of afikomen search that people might do if you're doing a Seder on Zoom online. And to see if people can search not only for the afikomen in person, but to give people something Jewish to search for online, so that people might be able still to engage in that fun moment. Barech, to say the blessings after the meal. How can we go through this year without a sense of gratitude? Hallel, likewise, is not just about gratitude, but about singing. I don't know how singing goes in your home. I'm lucky that when I'm with my family, they sing really well. When I grew up, we didn't know, we didn't sing very much, and by the time we finished singing Chad Gadya, you kind of knew who killed the kid. We were not singers, but finding that joyous moment to sing a bit, I think, is a wonderful thing to do, or even to find music that you can play and to share it at that time. And nirtza. Nirtza is usually translated as conclusion, but it comes from the same root as ratzon, as will, as ratsui, as acceptable, as desired. This year's Seder is going to be different. Give yourselves permission, and give those people who may be helping you through a Seder permission to appreciate what they do, and to make certain that this year's Seder is one that, as different as it's going to be, that we can accept and appreciate. I'm going to continue with the next slide in a moment, but Sarah, are there any questions that we think maybe we need to take before we move forward?
We don't have any questions yet, but
Great.
if anybody has questions, please just use the chat feature here, and I will we'll get them going.
Excellent. All right, well, continuing onward to our next, these 15 steps are the elements of our Passover Seder, but it was pointed out by a traditional commentary that they really represent 3 different aspects of the Seder. So if you're saying, oh my goodness, 15 different things, even though we do them or try to do them each and every year, this year it sounds like so much. What are the 3 different building blocks of that evening? Well, the first 5, Kiddush, the washing of hands, the eating of the greens, the breaking of the matzah, the central matzah of the 3, and the telling of the story. Those 5 first elements, those focus on the actual experience in Egypt. What was it that was like? How do we do the central mitzvah of this evening? How does each person find a way, not just to look at this as some historical event, but to say, I myself went forth from Egypt. That's the central challenge, is to make it meaningful. And it's a little harder this year, I think, to do. So thinking in advance to say, what are the moments in the life of my family, in my life? What are my experiences that I've had in the last number of weeks as our life has changed completely? That remind me of what it means to have restrictions on our freedom. Sharing these experiences is something that I think people need to say out loud, and that in fact is right in tune with the first key element of the Pesach Seder, is telling the story and experiencing the reality of the challenges that our people had in the past and the challenges that we live with today. The second 5 elements of the Seder are really very much about physically taking in. Actually, this is the eating portion of our evening, but it's taking in the symbolic foods. It is when we eat the matzah and the maror, and when we have the Hillel sandwich, Those things are always significant to us, but they are in many ways what make this night what it is. So is it possible that a given Seder this year is not going to have all the different foods and all of the different delicacies that we may become accustomed to this year? I know that the idea of shopping in so many different places so that I can get all the things that I'm accustomed to, that sounds quite difficult to me, but making sure that everybody has for yourselves, if people you know are participating online and they're in the city but you can't see them, dropping off on their door a little care package that has matzah and a little bit of maror, a little bit of bitter herbs, and charoset, so that we can have those key symbolic foods. I think those are the core elements of what makes the personal sensory experience of a Seder. And then the last 5 elements are really about the experience of thinking toward the Gula, the redemption that is to come, from the eating of a festive meal, even at a time of difficulty, to the playfulness of the Afikomen, to blessing and singing, and ending our Seder singing of Eliyahu Hanavi and Lashana Ba'abil Shalayim next year in Jerusalem. These elements are all about imagining a better time. I think that this year for each of us is really so important for us to be able to think past the moment that we're in right now and look toward the next experience that we're going to have. To say not just how might our Pesach Seder be next year, but to start to imagine what are the things we're going to enjoy. What are the things we look forward to? If today we were able to freely and safely do more, what are the first 3 things that we look forward to doing? Let's imagine the days to come and the times to come that are near, because we can't jump to some sense of redemption in the great future. We're going to get there step by step. And so getting there step by step together by taking the time to imagine it that night, right? So living the past, taking in those key symbols, and then thinking to what is it that we ourselves can do to start to experience that sense of freedom and redemption. I think those are the 3 key elements that make a Seder a Seder.
Thanks, Rabbi. So we have a couple questions here. The first is, in recent times, it's become a tradition to add other things to the Seder plate. So for example, an orange. What could we add to the Seder plate this year to acknowledge all those who are still having to work and are putting their health at risk for us?
I think that's a great question. Thank you. And I love the sense of creativity, right? The most common new symbols that you will see is the symbol of putting an orange on a Seder plate. There are 2 different understandings of that tradition. It seems the origin of that tradition was it's a tradition that came out of the United Kingdom, and that was about the inclusion of LGBTQ community in the Seder. People often think it was gender-based, but it's more about gender identity, that particular tradition, and it's about inclusion. It says looking at the Seder plate and seeing something that we didn't traditionally expect to see on the Seder plate is a reminder that we need to look outside of our comfort zone. Likewise, you'll see a kos Miriam, a cup of Miriam, a cup of water that's placed on the table, and that reminds us of Miriam's role in ancient times, and is a reminder of the importance that all Jews, that leadership needs to come from women, from men, from all members of our community. What might we do to suggest something that reminds us and that honors the importance of those who are working? If you're lucky enough to have well, here's what I'm going to suggest as a creative thing to do. When we get to the 10 plagues, and we have a slide about those later, if we actually get as far as that slide, which we don't need to, it is traditional to take our finger and to remove a drop of wine from the cup. So I'm going to suggest this year that every year, what do we do when we're aware of the plagues in our world? And certainly this feels like a plague, what we're going through now. We decrease our cup of joy by taking actually traditionally not just 10, but actually 16 drops of wine out of our cup. And I'm going to suggest that this year, one creative thing we could do would be then after doing that, to refill that cup of wine in honor of those who are increasing our chance of survival, our opportunity to express joy, all of those who are giving of their time and sacrificing, risking their health to look after us. So I'm going to suggest, and thank you for the suggestion, I think I'm going to try to do this at my Seder as well, that after we remove the drops and recite the plagues, that we then add to the cups and lift our cups in honor and respect for those who are taking the risks necessary, whether it's in a hospital or a grocery store, to keep us safe at this difficult season. So
we do have a number of other questions. I'm not sure if you want to handle them now or if we want to proceed and then.
Why don't you name a couple other questions and then we'll get to them, but I'll get to another slide or two as well.
Okay, so quickly now, and then we'll have more after. Why do we drink 4 cups of wine in the Seder?
Well, I'm glad you asked that.
That was not planned.
Absolutely, I appreciate the question. And 4 is a key number for the Passover Seder. Usually we're used to the number 3, the number 7. There's so many traditional numbers. 40 is a number we see a lot in Torah, but tonight, the night of the Seder, is a number of 4s. And what I can say is that the number 4 is actually more significant than the explanations that come after. So it's a common question, why is it that we would have 4 cups of wine? Well, Exodus Rabbah, one of the earlier Midrashic commentaries, the Midrash on the book of Exodus, the book of Shmot, gives the answer that you'll hear most, that in the beginning of Parshat Va'era, there's a description of the redemption to come, and there are 4 different languages, 4 different expressions of redemption. And so to fulfill that sense of feeling the exodus from Egypt and knowing what it's like to be redeemed, that particular midrash says, well, the 4 cups are for the 4 expressions of redemption. But the Kli Yakar, who was the rabbi of Prague in the early 1600s, he makes a totally different connection. He says, no, let's look at the 4 cups of wine as representing the word kos, which means a cup, and that Pharaoh's steward said the word kos, the word cup, 4 times in sharing his dream with Joseph. It sounds kind of like a stretch that he would say that. But think about it. The beginning of the redemption, in many ways, comes when Joseph is able to be redeemed, that he, in fact, in the story, becomes Pharaoh's number 2 and therefore saves Egypt. That it creates the situation where he might actually later be there for the Egyptians, then the slavery takes place, but then we come forward. So it's not always a straight story. I think maybe that's the message here, is that redemption comes with 2 steps forward and 3 steps back and 1 step forward and 1 step back. And that's another suggestion of what the 4 cups mean. Then again, interestingly enough, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, actually that should be an N, not a T, Shnei Luchot HaBrit, who is a medieval Jewish legal commentator, suggested that 1 cup for each of the matriarchs. That it isn't left only to modern Jews to suggest the important role of men and women, the important role of the matriarchs. And his suggestion was that it's for 1 for each of the 4 matriarchs. Whereas Abarbanel, Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, a Renaissance Jewish Italian commentator, says instead that the 4 cups of wine are redemptions that take place in 4 different time periods. That the first one of those is when the Holy One chose our people, at the time of Abraham and Sarah, of the call of the Jewish people. And that the first cup, we have to think back to that particular time. And we have to be aware that as members of the Jewish people, we have a responsibility. Second, when we were brought out of Egypt, the main idea of the Pesach Seder. Third, that this is not a time, says Abarbanel, just to think about Egypt, but we survived oppressions and challenges and exiles again and again in each and every generation. The Seder, the Haggadah, the Siddur, the book of the telling, right? Haggadah means telling. The Haggadah that my family uses has a section, especially around Elijah, that talks quite clearly about the Shoah and our survival from the Shoah. We have to be aware of multiple oppressions and survivals and challenges. Hopefully that can bring us strength in a year like this to know that this challenge, while it is significant, it should be kept in context compared to the other things our people has survived. And that the fourth one is for our redemption in the future. So that's a survey of a number of the traditional explanations for why 4 cups of wine. And certainly if they had so many different ideas, it shows that each of us also could add our own.
Sorry, I was muted here. I mean, we have, sorry, there are a number of questions here. We will say, why did God, I mean, this is another one. Why did God need to see the blood on the doorpost? Surely God knew how and where to carry out the plague of the firstborn.
Thank you for that question to the Talmudic and Midrashic scholar who asked it. It's a very common question in our tradition and an excellent question. Why is it that God would need the sign? And the traditional answer is that just like what we do at a Pesach Seder, just like prayer in general, that the forms of those things are really more for us than for God. Let me say that in a more thorough way. The people of Israel were slaves in Egypt. God didn't merely want to redeem them as a sense of gift. How do you feel when somebody does something for you that you didn't have any opportunity to earn? That you weren't able, at least in part, to be a partner in that good act. It often, even though we like a gift, nevertheless, it often makes us feel even less when we don't have the opportunity to do and to earn things. And so the traditional understanding of why the Jews, the Israelites in Egypt, were told to put blood on their doorposts is because it was a chance for them to have zechut mitzvah, for them to have the merit of responding to a divine command, of doing a mitzvah, and was the step to make us partners in our own redemption instead of counting on God. I think it's a good message, especially because we need to rely on others and have faith that this is going to get better. But at the same time, we need to be partners in managing our situation today. And that's the most common explanation of why it is that the ancient Israelites were told they had to put blood on the doorpost. It's more for us than it is for God.
We have one other question I think we should just pause for now. It says, do you believe, as some are saying, that the tide will turn during Pesach, freedom from this worldwide plague? And specifically, what's our role in Tshuva as a light into the nations?
That's a really excellent question. I hope that the tide of our own attitudes changes during this. What I believe is that a virus is a virus. Virus doesn't know religion, it doesn't know race, it doesn't know gender, it doesn't make any distinctions of these kind. To some degree, this virus seems to know age. It is somewhat more dangerous to older people, but we're also very much seeing that it affects younger people as well. So please, I want to urge you, especially those who are healthy and younger, not to take any of what's going on in our world lightly right now, to be aware that the virus knows no bounds. Nevertheless, I think many of us, and I'll speak for myself, I have found this step by step, even though intellectually I know how important it is. It's taken me quite a number of steps to really accept the importance of distancing, of modifying our behavior, of looking at how we do things in a new way. I think that during Pesach, it's quite possible, it's such a powerful time of reflection for the Jewish people that maybe our inner commitment and our inner life during this time can change. I don't think that, my own personal belief is that the tide of the virus itself is going to change when we are responsible enough and in the amount of time that such a thing takes. And I only hope that it's during Pesach, because that would make it sooner than later. As a light to the nations, I have to say that I've been following very closely to look at, watch our state of Israel's response to the virus. I think we in our community have to look to the actions that take place there and the actions of ourselves, both as a cautionary tale of what happens when we're not responsible enough, and as a sign of pride to show how it is that the incredible research that goes on in Israel certainly seems to be leading the world in the search for a vaccine for this virus. And I'm enormously proud of that. To see that rabbis from around the world, from every different hashkafa, every different perspective on Judaism, have been stepping forward and trying to help our community cope and focusing on the needs of the people, I think is a sign to those just beyond our people. And I hope that we can demonstrate through the way we observe this, our most serious of holidays, we can remember that we need to be a light to the nations, which means not just focusing on the viral outbreak, but remembering that there are many who live a very, very harsh and difficult existence, who only wish they had the problems that we do. And that we can remember not only to respond to the realities of the virus, but to continue to address and support the needs of the most downtrodden in our world. And in doing so, can continue to set a good example. So let me take a moment and talk a little more, since we did so, about creativity. I mentioned about starting the Seder when we make Kiddush on a positive note, but for many of us, this is not an easy holiday to begin. I have unfortunately had the responsibility to officiate at 3 different funeral services already since the closure, and to see how isolated the families are, how without they are, and to see even those who are in the year of mourning, how difficult Pesach time is, because we're without those people. We have empty chairs around our table. And I'm going to suggest also that if that is your circumstance, if that's how you feel, to make this moment your own, not to allow it to be just a shadow on this night, but to light a light. It is traditional, as these words share, to light a 2-day or 1-day Yortzeit candle at the beginning festival of Pesach. It's a time, and so I'm going to suggest, not just, if you haven't done it, think about doing it this year. If you have done it, let's make it something meaningful. Let's take this moment and light that candle before we start our Pesach, our Seder, and let's make this a time of memory. Many years ago at our family Seder, a younger member of our extended family had passed away not so long before Pesach, and it created, in order to address that, after lighting the Yortzeit candle, we as a group, we had a minyan at that point, and if you have a virtual minyan, or even if you feel it's right for you, you can do this as well. We started, before we sat down and started our Seder, we said Kadesh for those people who are still around our table, even though they're physically no longer with us. And not wanting that to be a bitter beginning, but at least bittersweet, it also created a tradition where each of us at our Seder table, or our Seder Zoom this year, before starting our experience, we go around and we each share for whom we are named, so that we can remember not only those we are missing, but really gather the memories of those people who have made us who we are, and enrich our Seder. So even thinking of the way you start, it's a reminder, like Sarah shared the question about other new rituals that happen around the Seder. Creativity is what created our Seder as we know it. I'm going to urge you to think about what you need, and to reach out to others, to your rabbi, and to find those moments that are going to help strengthen us in our Seder this year. So I want to move on a little bit and talk about the story and talk about ways, in fact, that we can do this year, because no question, like we've said, this is going to be a different Seder. So it's so important to tell the story of the Seder. Here in front of you, you have 3 different images. Now, it took me a very short time to find these images, just looking online, different moments in the Passover story, in the story of the Exodus. And so I want you to take a look at these stories right now. Each of these moments represents potentially a key moment in experiencing the story of the Exodus, a moment that we could relate to, right? And I think you can see what each of these are, right? We have Moses' mother and his sister Miriam holding the baby Moses at the beginning of the story. In the center there, an interesting artist rendering of the sneh, the burning bush, right? The moment where Moses was called. And then on the right, we have an artistic depiction of many of the moments, including a number of the plagues, the actual Egypt experience and the plagues themselves. So I wonder, think about it. This year, what is for you, of these 3 moments, here's one question you could ask, especially if you're Zooming a Seder to people. You can put images like this on the screen and say, okay, which one of these this year speaks most to you? People can talk out loud. If your numbers are small, people can add suggestions in the chat. If it's a small group, you can even allow everyone to share, and people can share their own images, their own pictures they find that make the story real for them. It is, and the more when we're doing these things through Zoom, the more that we create open questions for people to respond to, I think the more meaningful it is for people to prepare to have a moment that really is meaningful for them. Of these 3, by the way, I always find it fascinating to focus on the moment of the burning bush, because of the way that story is told in the book of Exodus, where it tells that Moses was acting as a shepherd for his father-in-law, the Sheikh of Midian. And when doing so, he was in the mountain and he saw something he'd never seen before, this bush, and he says, "Let me turn aside and see this great sight." And it was only after he said to himself, "Let me stop and turn aside," that in fact the entire story of Moses and his leadership begins. I think so often we're so focused on the way we do things, on the next step of what we do, that we don't stop to turn aside and to take full notice of the people in our lives, of the turning points that have made our lives real or possible. And so that's why that moment in particular is meaningful to me, but there are quite a number of different moments that might be significant. Sarah, are we, I'm happy to go on, or is there a question or 2 that's come in that you think would be worthy for us to focus on?
We have one quickly about plagues, asking if we should be, given what's going on, if we should add another plague this year or remove one.
What a good question that is.
I actually have never seen this before. So
certainly, I think this year of all years, it's going to be challenging to think about the plagues. And look at this image. This image I find interesting, again, because it has the plagues. Of course, this is a Hebrew image, so they go right to left and top to bottom, right? Blood, frogs, lice, wild beasts, cattle disease, right? Especially like the cow with the thermometer in his mouth there, boils, locusts, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the death of the firstborn. But look at the image. This reminds me of this tradition that we have now that if people have in their homes or are able to get this year, where you can go get plague bags, where people get a bag with different symbols so that the kids can throw them around or have them at a time like this. I think that likewise, it's this balance that I think we need to find this year as well, that we tend, even in focusing on these items, what do we tend to do? We find a way to tell the difficult story, but to take the edge off. To take the edge off for kids. I think doing it for kids, if we're lucky enough to have them at our Seder or part of our Zoom Seder, takes the edge off for us individually as well. And so that's a balance. And I think, should we remove a plague or add this to those plagues? I don't personally, if that's meaningful for you, then certainly I think we have to tell the story, but I think it's better to do it in a different context. To add, it is more, you see in a lot of Haggadot, you see a list of the historical, the traditional, the plagues of the book of Exodus, and then you also find a list of modern plagues. That you also find that here's a description of 10 plagues in our world, 10 challenges that we live with. And I think potentially you'll find that you can look that up online as well, or in a Haggadah that you may have access to. But I think it's important for us this year to have a different kind of balance, that I think if we're going to add plagues, and I think we do need to address the reality of the experience of plague that we're in the midst of, that we shouldn't only talk about the 10 plagues, but about the 10 blessings as well, right? When we sing Dayenu, we sing, and if there's anything we sing, it's often Dayenu. We mention all of the blessings, all of the things that God, that the Divine One has done for us. And so if we're going to add modern plagues, something that I think is important, and I think it's fair and honest to mention COVID in them, that at the same time, we should also make a modern Dayenu, that we should also talk about 10 things or create 10 things that we're grateful for. We might do it in advance, we might do it at that time. You might come up with 6 or 7 of them online if you have a Zoom Seder, and encourage people through chat to add in more of their own suggestions. So I do think that this year we should include the reality of our lives at that time. Again, we haven't done the mitzvah of sharing in this moment if we haven't made the reality of our lives part of the story. But we also have to answer that last line this last question that I added to this slide. We have to say to ourselves, what is the goal of telling both of these stories today? This year, when we're telling the story of the Exodus, and we're telling in particular the story of the plagues, why are we doing so? What's the goal? What are we trying to remember? I don't think there's only one answer, just like as you've seen, even for the 4 cups of wine, there's so many different traditional explanations. There's not one explanation, but I think saying to ourselves, why are we telling this story again this year? It's such an important story, but what lesson do we want to get from it? And then likewise, if we're going to address modern plagues and modern blessings, we have to say, especially if we're dealing with children who need honesty and they also need our care and support, we have to decide what is the goal of telling the story. I think we're trying to engender a sense of resilience and an awareness that the world is full of challenges, but if we work together, we can overcome them without creating an atmosphere of anxiety and fear. And so saying out loud for ourselves, what is it that we're trying, what's our goal? What are we trying to avoid in telling these stories and fashioning those things that we say, those things that we share with one another around those goals, I think is a very important way for us to address these plagues this year.
So we only have a few more minutes left, and I have a couple other questions that have come up, but they're actually more community focused. So maybe if we take a couple, if anyone has any further questions, maybe just put them in the chat now, and maybe Rabbi, I'll turn it back to you, and I'll come back if people are asking questions here, and I'll just take a couple minutes to address the few questions at the end that people have asked that are community focused.
Okay, sure. So I'm not an, what I want to do now, because we only have, like Sarah said, a few more moments, is share just a couple more thoughts before we conclude, as well as if there are other questions that we think we ought to address, we can certainly do that. First of all, here's what I want to do. I want to pause this morning, and I want to take a moment to think about, to send our prayers to those in our community who are directly affected by this virus. Speaking to a member of our congregation on his cell phone while he's in the hospital struggling for breath just earlier this morning, who's suffering from this, is a reminder of the incredible reality of this situation. And so I do want to pause for a moment. I'm going to say a prayer silently in my head, not just for that person, but I think when we gather virtually as a community, first and foremost, we have to have in our hearts and minds those people, whether they happen to have COVID-19 or who are forced into isolation by our reality today. And so I want to take just a quiet moment and to send out some of this energy that we've put together, to send a prayer to them in hopes of their refuah shlema, their full and complete healing of body and spirit. In addition to our prayers for those who are directly affected, as Sarah mentioned, I want to express our gratitude, not just for those on the front lines, very much for them. And I appreciate the opportunity in this webinar to come up with an idea of how we might honor them in the Seder, but to challenge ourselves. We know that hundreds and hundreds of people at UJA, at every synagogue, at Temple Sinai, have put themselves forward to reach out to those who are in need, to those who are isolated. And so in addition to doing that in an organized way, let's show that we've internalized the lesson of Pesach by reaching out, by connecting to those who are in need, by empathizing and feeling the challenge of those who are isolated and being there with them and for them. So I hope that we can do that. And in addition, as I mentioned, I'm going to sort of get toward a conclusion here the way that I started, which is to look at this holiday as an opportunity, not a source of pressure. This is eventually also Chag HaCherut. This is the holiday of freedom. It's a time where we can appreciate not just the limitations in our lives, but what we can do, what we do have. And so I hope, regardless of the shopping opportunities and regardless of the stress of that and the need to create a Seder that feels meaningful in a time where so many things feel so different. Let's take this entire week plus of Pesach. Let's take this entire time, and each day, let's ourselves think about some kind of freedom that we enjoy, some kind of blessing in our lives, some kind of gift that we have because our ancestors were freed from Egypt. And we have this incredible and privileged, most of us, life that we share today. And let's make sure that it's a time of reflection, a time of meaning, and a time of gratitude for all of us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Dolgan. We are so appreciative that you took the time to speak and to join us today. It really will be a different kind of Passover, but I think, we're grateful for the support that you and our rabbinic leaders have shown to us, providing so many different resources as we enter this time. So thank you so much. We did have a few more questions just, as we head into the holiday. and we can probably address them together because both the Temple Sinai community and other synagogue communities in UJA have all been working together on a number of these things. One is whether or not we're providing Seder kits for those in the community who request them, and what's happening with the Passover food drive delivery. So perhaps I'll answer the second part of that question first. The National Council of Jewish Women does a phenomenal job of sending out their Passover, the food, to more than 1,600 families every year who need that food. UJA does it in partnership with them most year, all years. This year, it's a fabulous organization. It's volunteer run. And so amidst all of the isolation and what happened, UJA was able to step up, and we built tents in our parking lot and actually worked with the National Council of Jewish Women to make sure that in a safe way, we were able to assemble. Actually, we had closer to 1,800 of those boxes that went out. They've all been delivered. Those families have food for the next few weeks through Pesach. We're very grateful to those of you on the phone who volunteered and who stepped up, but that went out. In addition, UJA we have a hotline that's been set up for families who are in need of food. We now have hundreds more, and unfortunately more and more calling in daily. We've organized separately a new initiative to get food out. It's about 2 to 3 weeks at a time for a family of 4 that will go out and be delivered to any family who's in need of help. So again, don't hesitate to reach out to UJ if you know someone who's in need. It could be someone who's isolated, alone, can't go out shopping, or in financial need due to a change of circumstance or anything at all. But that food will continue to go out, and it won't just be for Passover, but for the duration of this crisis that we're in. In terms of kits, we have a list of resources that we're happy to point people to if they need a Seder kit, but I don't know, Rabbi, if you have anything that you've been pointing people to.
We've been helping people individually, and it's a reminder also to the Seder elements, we're so accustomed to marking them in a particular way, but being creative in providing yourself the Seder elements, as well as letting others know who can help you so that we can provide the kind of things that you need. Again, there are different, we don't necessarily have to have horseradish to have a bitter herb. People who don't, it's traditional for vegetarians now, instead of the shank bone, they use a beet because it's the only vegetable that's bloody. But it's a reminder to use different symbols if you don't have what you need, to replace the historical symbols on the Seder plate for this particular year. As well as to reach out to the elements of the Jewish community you're connected to, because as we're doing, so many of us doing shopping and reaching out and helping those in need, there's an opportunity for us to provide some of those basic needs as well. And Yishur Koach to all the incredible work that UJ Federation has done in the community at this time, making a difference for so many.
Thank you. We have 2 other quick questions here. One is, do you have a Haggadah online that we can share with members of our family? So I'll speak from UJ, and I know Temple Sinai is doing also something here. UJ has a virtual resource, a video resource that we'll send out, which I think is about 15 rabbis who provided different parts of the 15 parts of the Seder that we're going to be able to circulate to everybody. It'll go out to our entire mailing list tomorrow morning, so you will get a copy of that, a link to that. Feel free to watch it during the Seder, before the Seder. It's about 40 minutes long, including some of the songs and things like that. And so it's really a supplementary product for assistance for your Seder. So we have that. I'll turn it over to Rabbi, who I know Temple Sinai is doing some amazing things with Zoom Seders for the second night.
Yeah, thank you. That anyone's welcome to join us. You can find all the links on our Temple Sinai website, templesinai.net. That Cantor Charles Osborne, our senior cantor, and I are leading a second night Zoom Seder for anyone who wishes to participate on Thursday night at 6:30 p.m. And likewise at 5:30 p.m. that night, we're going to do just a 15-20 minute brief story and song Seder experience for little kids, for families with little kids, for whom a full Seder in front of a computer might not be the best option.
Thank you. Last thing that came up, we had one person who suggested that, it's going to be quite difficult this year to search and reward for the Afikomen, given that Zoom will mean that people are searching in up to, many different locations. This individual set up to 5 locations. And he was asking if perhaps this year people wanted to consider making a Jewish or, donation to a Jewish or Israeli charity. I think that's a beautiful idea. Every family will do what's right for them, but certainly there's no shortage of causes. If, and this is by no means the purpose of this call, but if you're looking at possibly doing something like this and you're looking to really do something hands-on and buy a box of food for a family, you can reach out to us as well, because we're able to send you a picture of what that box looks like and all the contents, so you can show children and your family what they've done as a mitzvah with their afikomen reward this year.
Yeah, definitely. It certainly speaks to the meaning of the holiday to look for ways to give back, not to just give one another, and appreciate that's a beautiful suggestion that someone made.
So thank you so much, Rabbi Dolgan, and thank you to everybody. I wish you a Chag Sameach on behalf of UJA, and I'll give Rabbi Dolgan the last word.
Just wishing everyone a Chag Sameach Uvari, that everyone should have a happy and a kosher and a safe and healthy Pesach. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.